What's up, you guys? This is Vindictam's Cantina here, coming at you with a new video. And in today's video, which was supposed to be up on the 19th, we're going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. Now, as what all Star Wars fans know, we have one more anniversary. Well, actually, we have two anniversaries this year. I didn't realize it was also the 45th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. So happy anniversary to that fantastic Star Wars movie. And of course, it is going to be the 10th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 7 The Force Awakens in December. However, we are here for Revenge of the Sith. So, Revenge of the Sith to me is definitely one of those type of, I guess, book closer moments in life to where we are never going to be seeing that ever again. And that is, of course, is the fact that Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith turned out to be the end of an era. Mainly because it was George Lucas's final live action Star Wars production that he was, in control of. Obviously, it wasn't his final thing that he did with his creation. Obviously, he worked on the Star Wars brand, the Clone Wars TV series and movie with Dave Filoni. He also helped out with The Force Unleashed, which in a lot of ways to me, The Force Unleashed and The Clone Wars are like kindred spirits, considering that both apprentices so happens to be the apprentice of Anakin during, his two different lives. One, Ahsoka being his Jedi life, Starkiller his Sith life as Darth Vader. They both use Anakin, Graflex style hilts. They both use a reverse grip. So it's very interesting how you know, those two productions were kindred spirits in a lot of ways. But Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith is, I've gone on record so many times, it is my favorite Star Wars movie. Now, I'm not saying that it's the best, because that is a subjective thing. Obviously, if we're going to go by just overall, just how well it was made, obviously Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars movie ever made. By none. If I were to throw bias out the window. But Revenge of the Sith is my personal favorite. Empire is actually tied with Return of the Jedi as my second favorite. If I had to be really honest, I actually like the first 6 Star Wars movies equally. But if I had to go in a order of my favorites, I can totally do that. So, Star Wars Episode 3 is the movie that a lot of us was waiting for. It is the final combination of the prequel trilogy. It was how we get to see how Anakin became Darth Vader. We see how, that duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan went on that lava planet, or when George talked about it back during the 80s. It was either late 70s, 80s, somewhere around there, to where they dueled in a volcano. We get to see some of the stuff that's being set up for the OT. So, like, perfect example, we see the Tantive 4. I believe at this point, it's the Tantive 3. I believe. Let me double check that. My mind's a jumbled mess because I got an email from FedEx about this package. I don't even know what package it is because I didn't get no shipping confirmation. which can happen. Yes, it's the tentative 3. Okay. We see a Tantive ship, this one being the Tantive 3. We see how, um, Bail Organa, well, correction. We learn who Leia was adopted by. We learn how R2 and C3PO ended up in Leia's possession. And we also see, you know, how Obi-Wan, took Luke to Owen and um um, Owen and Beru Lars on Tatooine. And it's all because all three of them equally decided that they need to hide the twins so that the Emperor doesn't find them. Obviously, at the time, they didn't know that Anakin was still alive. Um, very much more machine than man. Um, well, about to become more machine than man. And we see Chewbacca as well, and we see a YT 1300 ship, the same model as the Falcon. So this movie is a very important Star Wars movie. It is probably one of the most important films in the franchise. And I'm sure, and I really hope people that don't like the prequels will hopefully see that, it is a very important film. It's a very special film because, this is when everything gets set up. This is also when, Andor basically gets set up too. Naturally, obviously, when this movie first came out, Andor wasn't even, Andor didn't even exist yet. Or, heck, not even Rogue One. At this point in time, if you wanted to learn what happened to the Death Star plans, you had to play the Dark Forces video game. Because Kyle Katarn steals the plans for the rebellion. Um, so yeah, it is interesting um that this is a time when, the sequel trilogy wasn't being worked on. Obviously, George had story treatments, and what I might do for this video. I think at the very end, I think I will read off what he said about his sequel trilogy. So, well, let's get through this stuff about Revenge of the Sith first, and then we'll get to that stuff. So, we also get to see how the Empire was formed too, and we also got to see how the Jedi was wiped out. And so, yes, this movie is very important. Well, whether people like it or not. And honestly, if I'm gonna take a quick second to talk a bit of my thoughts on Andor, and I will be doing a video on my thoughts on the final episodes as well for you guys. Well, probably more of a full thoughts video as a whole. I might have Mizu join me in on that since she was here for the first one, but you know, gonna go by her mood and all that. But there's so much talk with Andor about how grounded it is and like how important it is that there is a lack of Jedi because of what happened, and it's like I totally agree. You can literally feel the effects of Revenge of the Sith throughout a lot of the modern Disney shows. Um, it definitely does probably feel the strongest in Andor, and I think the reason for that is because it is a much more darker show. It is a much more serious show. There's barely any sort of there's barely any sort of force users in it. There's only one force user in it, and it's a force healer. Um, and there's mentions of the Emperor here and there, although the Emperor has taken much more of a New Hope approach to where, you know, even though that he can't be seen, and anytime they mention him, when they don't mention him, you can literally feel his and Vader's presence because you know that they're lurking around there somewhere. Um, and it is interesting how much Revenge of the Sith, the events of it, how much it really affects the future. When you hear everyone talk about how, like, the dark times, it, even by how everyone spoke, it's like, how was the times, in between the fall of the Jedi and, of course, everyone saving Luke? Obviously, as we know now, it was, it's horrible. It was a very horrible time. There was so much oppression in the galaxy. You would have these little groups forming, and then eventually they would, become one big group, which became the rebellion. And, you know, so even though that Andor doesn't have any Jedi or doesn't have any mentions of like Obi-Wan, Anakin, and all that, you can still feel their presence in Andor because there is this large vacuum that is now just gone. Andor is a very dark show because it shows exactly what Yoda said in Revenge of the Sith, that the dark side has clouded everything. And in Andor, we see that. The Jedi and Sith are still very important in Andor because of the fact that, this is a show that takes place like way after way after Revenge of the Sith. So I think honestly, Revenge of the Sith has become one of those movies now that has become largely important to the Star Wars lore now because so much centers around it. And then of course if you factor in the Clone Wars TV series and movie and the first two prequel movies, the Clone Wars era, in my opinion, is probably the most important era of Star Wars. in terms of modern day lore. And I'm also including the old EU in that as well. Revenge of the Sith. Just from the music, from the production. Yes, it was largely CGI, but let me tell you, seeing that battle over Coruscant is still amazing. Seeing the various lightsaber duels, especially the ones between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and of course Yoda and Palpatine. You know, you know the the heartbreaking situation that happens with Anakin and Padme, and of course Anakin and Obi-Wan. And also too, if you watch Revenge of the Sith after you get done watching the Clone Wars TV series and movie, that movie is even more heartbreaking. Especially if you factor in Ahsoka as well. Like, people thought Anakin was dead, and then all of a sudden, this guy in a black suit, all of a sudden, he appears. Who is he? Who is this Darth Vader? Is he a droid, or you know, is he Grievous? And then, of course, too, as we see in Rebels, Ahsoka figures out who Darth Vader is, and it scares her. And it scares her, and it probably leaves her heartbroken because those two had such a strong brotherly, sisterly bond. Obviously, when Revenge of the Sith first came out, Ahsoka didn't exist yet. I know that they started working on that series like early. I just don't know the time frame, or I don't remember. So I'm sure that my editor will put the date when George started working on it. Well, George and Dave. Um, and just how much, just how much Anakin just entrusts the Jedi in the end. It's like, there's so many people that likes to think in black and white, and with Star Wars, you can't do that. Obviously, yes. If we were gonna look at, I, you know, if we're gonna look at things real realistically as possible, Anakin didn't need to break out the Youngling Slayer 9000 per se. Especially against younglings that weren't even fully trained yet. So, yeah, by that logic, yeah, he doesn't deserve any redemption. But that's what happens when you're desperate. That's what happens after you realize what you did was wrong and you feel like there's no turning back. That was Anakin. Big time. Anakin was a walking confliction. And it's what probably doesn't make it harder is that you have the Jedi Masters putting a tight leash on him, not letting him any room to grow, even though that he's the chosen one. And then meanwhile, you have this old, nice man, the Chancellor, treating you like you're his son or his grandson, and he's telling you exactly what you want to hear, and praising you and all that, instead of getting a lecture and, getting advice, or be getting advice from him even though you didn't ask. So Anakin joining Palpatine and doing his bidding, that makes sense for his character. It doesn't make things right. He did do a lot of wrong, but keep in mind, I mean, when Revenge of the Sith came out, the Inquisitors was a totally different thing. It wasn't like how Rebels portrayed them, to where they were basically these dark Jedi that helped Vader do Order 66, essentially. And and to be honest with you, if Palpatine did say that all Jedi must be hunted. Let me restart this whole thing. Not the whole video, just the whole part about Anakin speeds. One of probably the most contentious part of this movie is during a particular Order 66 scene. Master Skywalker, there's too many of them. What are we going to do? That scene. And that scene George put in to show how far Anakin has went into the dark side. It also shows exactly what happens when someone becomes obsessed. Now, why is Anakin obsessed? Because he wants to save Padme. Even though, technically speaking, if he just didn't, if he didn't start getting paranoid, which is totally understandable, because probably to him, it's like, well, geez, I'm having dreams of Padme dying. I had dreams of my mom dying, and she died, and I'm having dreams of my wife dying. Well, I gotta do something about it so that doesn't happen again, which is exactly what he said in, Attack of the Clones. That he will stop people from dying. He says that when he's having that emotional breakdown to Padme. So, the one thing that has always kind of driven me nuts about any fandom is that you have these pocket of fans in fandoms that kind of tries to think too much in black and white, like one perfect example is that there's always conversation about if Anakin deserved to be redeemed. Now, if we were to view that in a realistic light, no, he did a lot of bad things. Actually, if he existed nowadays and he did all that, he would have been either been put behind bars with no chance of parole. He would have a full-on life sentence, or B, he would be pretty much. What's a fun way I can say this? Basically he would be sentenced to a realistic version of a Sarlacc pit. But in this case, the slow digestion is waiting for people to decide when it's your time. If you catch my meaning. But if we're gonna view things by the rules of by the rules that George created, he did his job. He killed Palpatine. He did what the Force wanted him to do. The problem is that no one knows. People take the chosen prophecy and tries to make some sort of sense of it. And the thing is that even Yoda has said the prophecy could have been misread. So there's a chance that the Force was willing him to do all these horrible things. It's just so this way he could get close to Palpatine. We just don't know. And that's, in my opinion, the fun part of fiction. Is that we can have these discussions, we can have these debates, but this movie, in my opinion, shows a man that is holding on too tightly and is just taking the air out of the people around him. And that's Anakin. Because he is afraid. Which is funny because he's actually called the hero with no fear. And he has a lot of fear. That's one of his most biggest flaws in the prequels, is that he's too afraid. He just can't let go. Of course, I can't 100% fault him, because I'm not sure if I said this just now or not, but, when you have this man that is praising you and is acting like a father or a grandfather to you versus what you've been dealing with the Jedi, especially one Mace Windu that does not trust you and doesn't even throw you a freaking bone. Yeah, yeah, you are gonna choose that other person to save when it's literally, you know you're seeing one of them flock, you know, uh, trying to not get themselves electrocuted by force lightning versus the old man that was always there for you, even though technically you were in his trap the entire time and you had no idea until finally you ignite your lightsaber and in a moment of desperation you saved the wrong person, making your dreams come true in the end. And that's the part I like about Revenge of the Sith a lot, is that it goes to show you that when people have these dreams, they're vague. You don't know what could happen or how that thing happens. And so it's very interesting to see Palpatine's plan fully work. Although there's one problem. His plan worked, but that stronger apprentice that he was so proud of is now suddenly trapped in a suit and has less power now. But yet somehow, because of determination and the fact that he pushed through that suit's limits, Vader became a whole other animal compared to Anakin was. If Anakin was a master of lightsaber combat, Darth Vader trained himself to really rely on the Force. Revenge of the Sith is not a perfect movie by a long shot. Arguably, I've heard that the book is better because they go more in detail with things. Um, but at the end of the day, that movie is still a Star Wars movie. and it is the last movie George Lucas ever worked on. I'm not saying people have to like it for that reasoning, but it is super interesting to see how much this film has really became important in a lot of ways. From all the shows that came out in between episodes 3 and 4, well, that takes place in between 3 and 4. Even culturally as well, especially since now it's like, you know, it's cool now to like the Star Wars prequels instead of being ridiculed for like a bad films. I mean, there are still people that still crap on the prequels. There always will be. But you know what? Even they have to admit that the prequels had a better cohesive story. Well, not a better cohesive story, but a more planned out cohesive story compared to the sequel trilogy. But I'll get more into that when I do my video on The Force Awakens. And as for Anakin's mentality, I will do a separate video on that. I didn't want to touch on it too much, but I will make a video on that as well and offer my own opinions and insight and all that. Um, when it comes to the state of stars nowadays, it does make me sad that, like, I'm not one of those people that I'm not one of those people that have bashed George Lucas for certain decisions, like with the special editions, because I grew up with the special editions. That's the only way I knew how to watch the LT. So I don't have no sort of attachment to the unaltered pre 97 versions. Although I do agree that Han should still be shooting first, but that's besides the point because of his character arc. That was very important for his character arc. But other than that, I'm not bothered by it. Although that no at the end of Return of the Jedi, that needs to go. I like that scene silent, big time. Because you don't need that no when he picks Vader, when he picks Palpatine up and throws him. Like really. But you know, I don't often talk about, I guess, my views on say Star Wars too much, but I do miss the pre-Disney era a lot. I wish we could get those days back. I'm not gonna lie, I'm definitely one of those people that wish I could have gone back in time to stop George from signing that freaking contract. Especially knowing the sequel trilogy that we would have gotten. That would have been sweet. But I also understand why he sold it too. Because he wanted to spend more time with his family, and I totally get it, and I respect it. And some of you might be wondering, what is the best way to watch Star Wars? Well, that will be my next video. So look forward to that one. I think that's all I have to say for Revenge of the Sith. And of course, like I promised, I was going to read something from the Star Wars archives, episodes 1 to 3, 1999 to 2005, about George's sequel trilogy. So we're going to start from here. One of the nice things about doing these books over the past few years is that I see that I see that the people working for you now and those who worked for you in the past have a great deal of love and loyalty for you and your work. They've had tough but brilliant times. And then George goes, "We've been through a war together. There is no other way to describe it. It's intense. We got through it and had the good times and the bad times and the pressure and all the other stuff that goes on through that. They're a good group of people. Doug Chan, Ryan Church, and others described to me how much freedom you gave them and allow them to do the best work of their lives. The whole environment the whole environment that you've created, Lucasfilm, the ranch, ILM, Skywalker Sound, has been inspirational. So now this is where it gets juicy. So I wonder why you passed control of Lucasfilm onto Disney in 2012. At the time, I was starting the next trilogy. I talked to the actors and I was starting to gear up. I was also about to have a daughter with my life. It takes 10 years to make a trilogy. Episode 1 to 3 took from 1995 to 2005. So if you started, you'd finish 2022. I still be working on episode. It's like, let me figure out these Roman numerals here. God damn, I suck. These videos are technical, man. Okay, 9. Okay, got it. Okay, mute. Get it up. I still be working on episode 9 in 2012. I was 69. So the question was, am I going to keep doing this the rest of my life? Do I want to go through this again? Finally, I decided I'd rather raise my daughter and enjoy life for a while. I could have not sold Lucasfilm and gotten somebody to run the production, but that isn't retiring. On The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, I tried to stay out of the way, but I couldn't. I was there every day, even though the people were friends of mine and they did great work. It wasn't the same as me doing it. It was like being once removed. I knew that probably wouldn't work again, that I'd be frustrated. I am one of those micromanager guys, and I can't help it. So I figured I would forego that, enjoy what I had, and I was looking forward to raising my daughter. Also, I wanted to build a museum, which I'd always wanted to do. So I was thinking, if I don't do this now, I'll never get that done. I've spent my life creating Star Wars, 40 years, and actually, it's about ready to be, um, yeah, it's about ready to be, um, damn it, 50 years, 2027. And giving it up was very, very painful, but it was the right thing to do. I thought I was going to have a little bit more to say about the next league already started because I'd already started them, but they decided they wanted to do something else. Things don't always work out the way you want it. Life is like that. They should have kept him on because maybe just maybe those three movies would have been a lot more cohesive and not three Star Wars movies that had really nothing to do with each other in the end, in a sense. I know that they share some plot devices, but all three of them, especially 8 and 9, was so far off from what Episode 7 set up. But again, I will be talking more about that in my video in December. Now, this is where things get juicy. The Chosen One. When writing the movies, I tried to make sure that aliens and droids got killed, but not people. A, lo- a lot of a lot of stormtroopers died. That's right, but you didn't know they were people. We did kill three humans, and that was unfortunate. I was always bothered by it. When was that? On the Death Star. When Han and Luke go into the prison with Chewie to rescue Leia, they shoot three Imperial guys. The guards drew their guns and fired first, but it's still a shame. Really, yeah. We were very consciously didn't kill very many humans in those movies. What about the stormtroopers? They look robotic, but they're not. How how do you know what they are? Do you have a different idea of what they were? That part is interesting. Mm, mm. Yeah, they started out as clones. Once all the clones were killed, the Empire picked up recruits like a militia. They fought, but they weren't very good at what they did. That's why they kept missing. That's why they kept missing. Then after the rebels won, there were no more stormtroopers in my version of the third trilogy. I had planned for the first trilogy to be about the father, the second trilogy to be about the son, and the third trilogy to be about the daughter and the grandchildren. Episodes 7, 8, and 9 would take ideas from what happened after the Iraq War. Okay, you fought the war, you killed everybody. Now, what are you going to do? Rebuilding afterwards is harder than starting a rebellion and fighting the war. When you win the war and you disband the opposing army, what do they do? The stormtroopers would be like Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath's fighters that joined ISIS and kept on fighting. Although some of that probably has to be censored in this video. The stormtroopers refused to get up. The stormtroopers refused to give up when the Republic won. They want to be stormtroopers forever, so they go to a far corner of the galaxy, start their own country and their own rebellion. There's a power vacuums. There's a power vacuum, so gangsters like the Hutts are taking advantage of the situation, and there's chaos. The key person is Darth Maul, who had been resurrected in the Clone Wars cartoons. He brings all the gangs together. Was Darth Maul the main villain? Yeah, but he's very old, and we have two versions of him. One is with a set of cybernetic legs like a spider, and then later on he has metal legs, and he was a little bigger, more of a superhero. We did all this in the anime series. He was in a bunch of episodes. Darth Maul trained a girl, Darth Talon, who was in the comic books as his apprentice. She was the new Darth Vader, and most of the action was with her. So these were the two main villains of the trilogy. Maul eventually becomes the godfather of crime in the universe because as the Empire falls, he takes over. The movies are about how Leia, I mean, who else is going to be the leader, is trying to build the Republic. They still have the uh, they still have the apparatus of the Republic. They have to get it under control from the gangsters. That was the main story. It starts out a few years after Return of the Jedi, and we establish pretty quickly that there's this underworld. There are these offshoot stormtroopers who started their own planets, and that Luke is trying to restart the Jedi. He puts he he puts the word out. So out of 10,000 Jedi, maybe 50 or 100 are left. The Jedi have to grow again from scratch, so Luke has to find 2 and 3-year-olds and train them. It'll be 20 years before you have a new generation of Jedi. By the end of the new by the end of the trilogy, Luke would have rebuilt much of the Jedi, and we would have the renewal of the new Republic with Leia, Senator Organa becoming the Supreme Chancellor in charge of. By the end of the trilogy, Luke would have rebuilt much of the Jedi, and we would have the renewal of the new. And by the end of the trilogy, Luke would have rebuilt much of the Jedi, and we would have the renewal of the New Republic, with Leia, Senator Organa, becoming the Supreme Chancellor, in charge of anything. So she ended up being the chosen one. That was his idea for the sequel trilogy. That is where things is very interesting, because essentially that does sound a lot of the stuff that they've been doing lately, especially with this Maul show coming up. Assuming, of course, that is Darth Talon that we see in that leaked trailer. I saw it again. I mean, I saw it for the first time in theaters. I wasn't able to see it when it first came out. My life was hectic around that time. But this was a little bit more difficult video to definitely record for me. I'm still getting into the hang of doing content like this. So, anyways, you guys, if you're new here, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, and hit that bell button. Uh, let let me know what you all thought. Let me know if you all are, what things you guys agree with me on, what things you don't agree with me on. Let's keep things civil. I don't, I don't want people to go after each other or go after me in the comment section. So let's just have fun. Let me know what I can improve, because I'm just a song tuber. You know, this is my first time doing something out of my comfort zone, and I'm having fun so far. Um, there should be some more videos coming out too. Possibly next week. You guys might be getting a double video week, maybe, because of that package that I'm curious about. Um, but yeah, you guys, that's it for this video. I hope you all have a great. Oh my god! I hope you all have a great Memorial Weekend. Stay safe. I'm going to be seeing ACDC in uh in Chicago on Saturday, so looking forward to that. And of course, as always, may the force be with you all.